The J.T. Miller saga gets even more intense as NHL insider Elliotte Friedman reveals that multiple teams are in on J.T. Miller, leaving the Canucks in a situation to find the best suitor. We're going to break all this down and more later on this episode. Before we start, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone as we just reached 10,000 subscribers. We just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this journey and helping us out. But with that, let's hop straight into the first topic today, Darius, which is the fact that we got a report from the Donnie and Dolly podcast where Elliotte Friedman was on and said he believes Miller's preference is the Eastern U.S. Canucks are continuing to work at a Miller trade. Carolina, the Rangers, still in on it, and I wonder about the Islanders. Now, looking at this, we know there's so much speculation flying around about J.T. Miller, and it continues on where we've seen Patrick Allvin speak to the media yesterday, going in, and Chris Johnson said that he's been very active in pursuing trades recently. It goes into even a quote from Patrick Allvin himself, saying, "I'm not going to go into any specifics on any trade talks. We'll continue to see what makes sense." Now, just looking at all this, Darius, is this coming to the situation where you think a trade's just going to happen within the next week, or could you see this kind of drag on? And we'll get into the teams later on.
I don't think it's going to drag on. I think that there's a bit of maybe a bidding war happening behind the scenes, or maybe the Canucks are just really considering their options. We know that this past weekend, there was a trade, a concrete trade in place with the New York Rangers for them to acquire JT Miller from the Vancouver Canucks. And obviously there was some logistics that fell through, and then the trade itself fell through. But it sounds like they could revisit that. And it sounds like the Canucks are saying, you know what? We'll just revisit this at another time. We don't agree to these terms, and we'll circle back on it. And we're circling back on a couple teams. And the teams mentioned here are very interesting. Obviously, New Jersey has maybe been debunked in the last day or two. There's a lot of reports saying that, New Jersey's not in talks, but then there's a lot of conflicting reports, like Elliotte Friedman now saying that they are in the mix. Dallas is in the mix. Obviously, I think Dallas is in a trickier situation here to acquire JT Miller. I don't think it's as likely or easy for them. I think Carolina is an interesting fit, but at the end of the day, I think they're going to circle back on this very quickly. And I think he is going to end up a New York Ranger because he's not going to finish the season with the Canucks. It's reached the boiling point. It's not good for the Canucks. I feel like they need to rid themselves of that situation as a whole to get back on track. And if you're looking at the New York Rangers side of things, Chris Drury will do almost anything, I think, at this point to get JT Miller from the Canucks. So I think that they're gonna, go back and try and make a deal here.
And I mean, the biggest thing, we've seen reporters come out and just say at this point, the Canucks want to make a shakeup in this locker room. This is a core that hasn't been able to advance past the second round in the past 5 years that they've had this core together. So making a shakeup's the biggest thing, and we'll touch on some of these teams. The first one being the New York Islanders. Now, looking at JT Miller, the Islanders could acquire this guy and would help this team grow. JT Miller has 31 points in 35 games. He's coming off a 100-point season. He missed some time this year due to personal reasons when he left the team, but this is a player that Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders are going to be actively looking at. This is a team that also has expiring free agents on this team that's going to be moved. In Brock Nelson, you have someone like Paul Mary on his last year of his deal that they'll probably sell as well. This opens so much space for a JT Miller trade, and you could put JT Miller straight into this team. This is a team that's built to try to compete. It doesn't look like it's happening this year, but a quick rebuild, a pickup of a 100-point guy would be massive. Now, before we get into a certain player that the Canucks are looking for, do you think the JT Miller fit is good with the Islanders?
I think JT Miller fits in New York, no matter what team it is. Again, I don't know if we'll get to Carolina in a bit. I don't know if he fits with some other teams, but I think if you're looking at the Islanders in their current situation, not even their current situation, going back a couple of years now, they have a hard time scoring. And whether it's because of the way that they play or some of the personnel that they have, JT Miller would really help this team. Could play on the first power play unit, obviously. You don't know what's going to happen with Brock Nelson after this season. It looks like he's going to be traded. And even if he isn't, do they re-sign Brock Nelson? I think that's an interesting thing as well heading into this offseason. So this is another move that would completely retool your team. It would help you score more. And again, like you said, this team is built to win in a way, but they're just not. They're not, up to their potential right now.
And I mean, the biggest thing is if they do move out someone like Brock Nelson, if they move out Paul Mary to open up cap space for JT Miller, they can use these assets to acquire Miller or even flip Brock to the Canucks, as the Canucks do want a center back in this trade. They're looking for defense. They're looking for draft capital. But the biggest player that has been linked to the Canucks all season is Noah Dobson. Noah Dobson with the Islanders has been a steady number one defenseman. Just last year, 10 goals, 60 assists for 70 points. The year prior, 49 points, 51 points. This year, 24 points in 46 games. The biggest thing with Noah Dobson, he is on the last year of his deal. He's an RFA at the end of this, $4 million cap hit. So financially towards deadline, this trade could work. The Islanders are currently sitting with only $500,000 in cap space for deadline, but moving out key players like Brock Nelson and Palmieri would clear up space. Do you think the Islanders would move on from their number one defenseman since they almost have a logjam and some contracts to fill on the back end, or do you think this is almost asking for an overpayment?
It might be a bit of an overpayment because I do think he's their best defenseman. And right now, the cap hit that he's making, like, I don't know how they got him on that bridge deal because he should be making far more. I think he's due for a big raise. He's a great defenseman, 70 points, like you mentioned, right? And he's only 25 years old. So he's due for a big raise. So it could be an overpayment in that way, but could be a necessary evil to get something that you need on the front end, too. And again, JT Miller's a little bit older, but he can make an impact for you right now, maybe turn you around into a playoff team, although you would be losing one of your better defensemen, but you have to think of the cap situations too. So it's a very interesting fit for the Canucks. I think that's a slam dunk, right? Because I feel like you have to move off of JT Miller anyway, and you need help, especially on defense, especially right-handed defense. So it would make a lot of sense, but he is due for a big raise. So the Canucks have to keep that in mind too with their cap situation moving forward.
And I mean, jumping straight into the second team, we did a video on the Rangers, so we're not going to cover that. We'll put that somewhere on the screen right now if you do want to watch that. But the Carolina Hurricanes have been linked to him as well. This is a team that's desperately looking to compete and win a Stanley Cup. We see a deep defense. We see a deep forward group. The biggest thing with this team is if fans don't want to move on from some of their biggest contracts, Kotkaniemi is going to be a name that fans are going to want to move on from if Miller is acquired, but I can't see the Canucks doing a one-for-one swap. But looking at this, they are low on cap space. Once again, just under $300,000 in deadline cap space. Do you think realistically Carolina could make a trade without moving on from some of their core guys, especially on defense, because they have a sound defense, they have goaltending, they have the forward group, but adding Miller would push them to the edge. So would you move on from any of these maybe star forwards to acquire Miller, or do you think it's almost better if they just kind of sit this out?
I feel like it's better if this team sits this one out because coming into this year, I was thinking they lost a lot of good pieces in the last offseason. I was like, I'm not sure if this reign of terror they've been on in the Metropolitan Division will continue past last offseason, but it has. They've been playing well, and some of the younger guys are stepping up. They have really no cap space. Like they're going to have to get really creative, probably get a third team involved. Then you're giving up more assets. So I feel like with the team that they've built and what they have going into next offseason, because they're going to continue to shed cap and get younger as well, probably sit this one out, see what this team can do with the younger players. Although I think it's very interesting, JT Miller could come into this team again if you get creative with the cap and slide right into that second line center position or wherever you want to fit him. And maybe Chris Drury wants his relative back in return, right? That could be something. I'm not sure if the Carolina Hurricanes would want to make that trade, but again, they would have to get so creative with this, getting another team involved, moving off of some pieces that would probably help you in the playoffs anyway. So I'm not sure if this team wants to do that, but I think it's an interesting thing for them to look at because, you know, there's a lot of players here that will be expiring or on expiring contracts. So I wonder if you look at moving some guys out to make cap space for that.
But what's your guys' thoughts on this? What's your thoughts on JT Miller being linked to a handful of teams, as in the Carolina, the Rangers? Less convinced about Dallas and New Jersey, but also the Islanders. Let us know down in the comments. What do you think a package would be? Canucks fans, what do you want in return? Is it someone like Noah Dobson? Would you rather draft capital at this point to open up the doors for free agency? Let us know down in the comments. Way down there, leave a like, subscribe, share this with your friends. We'll be back later on with another episode, so keep your eyes out for that. But I've been your host, Mark, with my co-host, Darius, and take care.